Well, Richard, I guess it's time to go.
I think so.
And for our top story, Harvard has warned that Chinese technology is rapidly overtaking American capabilities. And in electric vehicles, why Nissan is probably the most serious threat to Tesla out of the traditional automakers. In energy, nuclear fusion. And apparently the race to harness the power of the sun has just sped up. On materials, IBM and Samsung teamed up to design vertical transport field effect transistors. On space, the James Webb Telescope, perhaps we could call it the new Hubble, has been lifted atop its launch rocket. In biology, the Google Earth of biology, a virtually stunning tree of all known life, is unveiled online. And now for us, Newsom in California has called for assault weapons ban modeled after the Texas abortion law. And now, in terms of health and medical and all that stuff, a tech bro thinks he's close to cheating death. That's interesting. So that's what we'll discuss today. And now, Richard, tell us in the top story about Chinese technology rapidly overtaking American capability.
Well, the race for high-tech dominance between China and the US is heating up, and it's starting to look like China will take the lead. This is a new report that is done by the Harvard Kennedy School, and they say that China is rapidly gaining steam in a number of areas, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G, semiconductors, biotechnology, and green energy. I'm a little suspicious about what they say about semiconductors, but let me go on with the article. They say on current trajectories, China will overtake the US within the next decade. This is the second such report that we've talked about recently. The previous one was talking about their taking the lead economically by 2030. This one is saying they will take the lead in terms of technology by then as well. The report said that China has already overtaken America when it comes to quantum computing. I'm not sure of the details of that. The announcements that I have read recently about who has the quantum computer with the most qubits are all American, but obviously the Chinese are busy, and maybe I just don't know about it, and maybe they're just not publishing as much. The China's rise in all of this has really been based on all of the money that they have been getting selling stuff to mainly America. So we have paid for their rise in technology by buying stuff at Walmart. And so they say similarly in the field of AI, they assess China as, quote, a full spectrum peer competitor to the US. And China is also on track to dominate 5G technology as well. China already has 150 million 5G users, whereas the US has only about 6 million. So they substantially have a bigger installed base. And the all of these new innovations and technology could further cement China's uh, coming position as the world's largest economic superpower. And they think it could start to draw businesses away from the US and towards China. They also could lead to big weapons development, and we've heard of their I don't remember what they call it, the 5 times faster than the speed of sound kind of missile that can drop from the sky. Does anybody remember what that technology is called? I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, it's called a hypersonic
That's right. Thank
missile.
you. Thank
And
you.
they can send it over the South Pole and basically attack any point in the world from the south rather than over the North Pole.
And what's significant about that, of course, is all our warning systems are pointed north.
Exactly.
Oops. And so anyway, they're saying there's no doubt that China is set to become the biggest, baddest superpower in the world in this next, within this decade. And they say it may only be a matter of time before Beijing completely dominates the tech world. So things are changing, and it doesn't look as good for the US as it once was.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's not really all that surprising because in the last 20 years or so, the United States is spending all the money they make on wars everywhere in Europe and so on, whereas the Chinese have been using those profits over the same period of time to develop their knowledge base. And besides that, the Chinese typically are pretty serious people anyway, very disciplined. So it only stands to reason that they should be on top. It's
Uh-huh. So you're saying the return on investment for wars is not very good, huh?
precisely.
Gee, I wish our rulers had heard of that.
Well, the Republicans like to see wars because that's a good way to make a lot of money.
Uh-huh.
You make a
Make a lot of money for a few people.
yeah, exactly.
But, we don't need to worry because regardless of what China does, we'll always have the lead in lawyers and celebrities.
Oh,
So,
yes.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure if having the lead in lawyers helps speed up the economy much.
I think that we might have a window of time with China because I don't think they're interested in getting into a big war and lose all the progress they have made. Wars are not profitable for them either. So we might have some years, except for Taiwan, which is a flashing point. But Taiwan might look, if this happens, they might look and say, we better work with the Chinese because the United States can probably not help us.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, there's also been strong moves between Russia and China to develop a trading currency that's independent of the US dollar.
Yes, yes.
And to inflict that trading currency on Africa and South Asia and all the places that China goes and Russia wants to go. So that'll be a threat and something to watch as well.
I think that will be part of the shifting economic currents that they're talking about. Because the dollar is one of the areas where the US still has a lead because it's still the kind of more or less official trade currency of the world. And like you say, China doesn't like that.
Richard, if we want to move on to electric vehicles, why is Nissan such a big threat to Tesla?
Well, the quick answer, excuse me while I try to fiddle with my computer screen. The big answer is that while a lot of the internal combustion engine manufacturers have big plans to go electric, Nissan, with their Leaf, have already produced 500,000 electric vehicles that their owners are quite happy with. I think we can ask
Norman.
yeah, that's right, Johannes. I don't see him on the screen. There he is. There's Johannes. We can ask Johannes about that, and
Well,
he'll say how happy he is.
I'm very
And-
happy with our Leaf, and they're also very inexpensive. We bought a 2016 Leaf with 29,000 miles on it, and it cost $15,000.
Well,
You cannot-
anyway, so they have, that's one of the reasons is they have experience. Now, Tesla is now producing its cars around the world at about 1 million a year. So Nissan's total production of 500,000 still is of a different order of magnitude, but that's one of the reasons. The next reason is Nissan is investing tens of billions of dollars in its plant in the UK in Sunderland, and near its plant is a Chinese EV battery maker that is producing and that will be producing enough EV batteries for 500,000 cars a year. And so they have close supply lines with the battery maker. And the other, so that is the second reason. The third reason ends up being in terms of chassis, platforms, they call them, that are designed for EVs. Nissan and its partner Renault have now a new EV chassis that they are ready to put in production and to make multiple models on. If you try to adapt the chassis for an internal combustion engine to an EV, it's not a very good fit. It's too heavy. It doesn't have space in the right place for the battery packs. And so you end up with an EV that has less range than a car that is made on a platform that is designed for that application. So that makes sense. And so Nissan then has three important things going for them already. And, you know, there are other competitors. Toyota, of course, has been a big producer of the hybrids, but they're playing catch up and they don't have platforms. It looks like maybe the biggest competitor from the existing manufacturers might end up being Volkswagen, and Volkswagen is spending more than twice as much as Nissan getting ready to convert to electrics, but already Volkswagen says that it takes them 3 times as long, 3 times as much labor as Tesla to make their EV, and they have plans to make that better. Right now, their plans still will end up narrowing the gap to double instead of 3 times. So they're way behind the learning curve and the manufacturing approach of Tesla. And again, those things say that among the current suppliers, it'll maybe be Nissan that has the best chance to be competitive. What the article doesn't talk about is the new suppliers, and already in China, one of the local Chinese companies that none of us have heard of has made a small EV that is outselling Tesla in China now. And I still think in 10 years, we will find one of the leaders in EV to be a company that none of us have heard of now. You know, new markets, new technologies create new markets and new competitors. And we're going to see that work out within this decade.
Any thoughts?
One thing that's kind of a disappointment is that they don't seem to be working on replaceable battery packs, such that you could, instead of charging up your battery, you just drive into a service shop and swap out your discharged battery for a full battery. But
oh yeah, instead of charging it, what we'll
And
talk
that-
about
and
it
you-
next week. One of the things that has been announced in the last couple of days is some company has made a charging system that is about 10 times faster than the current charging system. And they get that additional speed essentially by cooling, because the thing that limits the rate of the charging is heat in the charging system. And already their new system that is not yet on the market is faster than Tesla's best fast charge system.
In terms of Andrew's comment about batteries being replaced, some years ago, an Israeli company was really going gung-ho on that. And I think maybe it went belly up. I'm not sure why that didn't work, but it sounded so promising.
and there's an element of it's not so much the charging rate as it is the lineup of cars in front of the single charging station waiting their turn.
Yeah.
That's where the real time delay is.
But that one can be relieved with more charging stations.
But then they have to provide bigger electrical substations and electrical
Sure,
distribution and blah, 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 you know.
Right.
Well, the other factor is that a lot of people don't use them for long drives. We plug it in the evening, and next day we got 90 to 100 miles available and last for several days. So
if you're using it as a vehicle for in town, that's not an issue.
right.
So Richard, if we want to move on to energy, what's about this race for nuclear fusion?
Well, we've heard that nuclear fusion is going to be great. And for the last 60 years, they've been saying it's only 20 years away. And now, one of the things that is different now is that governments around the world have made so much advancement in the technology that private companies can kind of smell that there is money on the table. And in the last few months, various private fusion companies have raised $2.3 billion in investments, believing that these guys are going to be ready to produce hydrogen power, and they're betting that it will be available in the 2030s. And what we have heard about from several different sources, there are several times, there are several places in which projects are going on that will reach break even. That's the point where they generate more power than it takes to get them started. And they are expecting it from at least two different angles with different technologies by 2025. So that's pretty soon. And once that is proven, it will be only a matter of a few years before they're able to scale that up into production. And one of the things that's making it go faster is these private companies are willing to operate at more risk than government projects in the hopes of having a great reward. And the private efforts are going faster than the government efforts will be going. One of those is a company called First Light, and they are working on the technical issues, and they say how close it depends now is not time, but resources applied. And they are trying to make sure that they have the resources available. Now, fusion does not produce the radioactive waste of fission, and fusion, they say, could never result in a nuclear accident such as Chernobyl. And also the most efficient chemical inputs for fusion are deuterium and tritium, and those are also widely available, enough available where they say there's not going to be any kind of limits on the fuel. And just one point about the efficiency of the fuel, and that is just 1 cup of the fuel that is created by the process has the energy potential of 1,000,000 gallons of oil. So 1 cup equals 1,000,000 gallon. So 1 cup would generate enough power to power your home in America for more than 800 years. So those things mean that fusion may be able to provide cheap and virtually unlimited zero emission electricity and has the potential to save the world. I like things that will save the world. And the people, venture capitalists who recently invested 375 million in one of these fusion startups, saying, I couldn't be more optimistic. In addition to being our best path out of the climate crisis, less expensive energy is transformational for society. Now, these the present fusion approaches, the mainstream is using a tokamak that were originally developed by the Soviets, and this is the magnetic bubble. And the problem with the tokamak systems is they require enormous amounts of energy. And so far, though they've been working on them for 60 years, they haven't been able to make one that generates more energy than it takes to run it. And they're enough of a problem where one of the science writers who follows this, Stephen Krivet, says, when will we get electricity from fusion? Who the hell knows, is what the guy following this. And in the last 6 months, though, there have been a number of breakthroughs in both public and private sector that really show that it is encouraging. For example, in May, a machine known as from China, known as the Experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak, managed to sustain a fusion reaction at 120 million degrees C for a record 101 seconds. That's the longest time such a reaction has ever been sustained. It still was not at break even, but it gives you an idea of the problems that are handled by this magnetic container, that the temperatures of 120 million degrees C is pretty hot. How hot is the sun? 5,000 degrees C in its surface, something like that. So that's a pretty high temperature. Then there is a Boston-based startup that is Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which grew from MIT, and they have a startup, and they are demonstrating the use of a high temperature superconductor that generates a much stronger magnetic field than the traditional approach. And these machines will end up being smaller and cheaper and a lot more viable as a commercial source of power. And they're using known science just with new engineering and new methods. They expect that their demonstration plant will achieve net energy by 2025 and a commercial power station in the 2030s. So there are a number of projects going on that are promising in this way. There's another private company, General Fusion in Canada, and this is a Jeff Bezos-based company, and they think they will make fusion power a reality. They're using yet another approach, which I don't understand what it is. It's magnetized target fusion, and it's designed with a commercially viable power plant in mind. And its first demonstration plant is scheduled to be completed by 2025. So that's another one. And there are yet other efforts. There's a Project Helion. That's the one that was funded by the one Silicon Valley VC for 375 million. It's using another approach called non-ignition fusion. And the variety of approaches is one of the things that is really encouraging. There are different companies trying different approaches, all competing for the prize. And this means that, not all of these attempts need to be successful. We just need one of them to be successful, to make the energy equation in the world very different. And if it happens by 2030, then it's fast enough to bend the curve on emissions in the world. And it can do that even if it gets there by 2040. And they say, even if it doesn't happen till 2050, in 2050, we're still going to need something like that, because in 2050, current projections say the world will need 12 times more clean electricity than is produced today. And we're going to need it to get it from somewhere. And if somehow renewable power has done enough to be able to provide the electricity that's needed to run the households and the industry, there still is the issue of all this carbon in the air. And if you have cheap power, then that gives you the power to be able to use the current power intensive carbon sequestration approaches and be able to reduce the carbon levels in the world, making it hopeful for generations to come. So they're saying, even if it's too late to solve how much pollution we're putting in the air, it'll come online and be able to help us pull the carbon out of the air. So I think all of this is very hopeful.
Any thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering how is this stuff going to be packaged and handled?
The package and handle, they're still inside the reactor. It's going to be no human hands involved, and it doesn't make waste that is a problem. And other than that, it's going to be packaged and handled on the electricity lines. I guess if it's producing that much power, they're going to have a big wire coming out.
Well, that's what I was wondering, you know, how are you distributing something like that?
Again, in the power grid,
Well,
Well,
over wires.
and there would be opportunities to just integrate these things with existing fossil fuel fired power stations, because they
Right.
use the same turbines and all that stuff. And same generators.
Right,
Yeah.
it's using, once it's generating the power, what Andrew says is correct. You know, what comes out of this is some version of heat, often steam, and it driving the generators.
well, I think we have to come up with something that creates power that's small enough that every household would have its own plant, if you will. So to get rid of all these cables that are, you know, they look awful, and not only that, they're dangerous. And these the central points. I mean, we're very vulnerable there.
Well,
Based on,
Andrew, haven't they been working on beaming power?
Yeah, they can do that with microwave technology. They can beam power.
So,
They talk about putting big reflectors and satellites up that would send
yes,
power from orbit back down to the Earth.
yes. Somehow having 1,000,000 watts of power being beamed from a satellite makes me nervous.
yes, and would be,
Yeah, you want them to have their aim okay. And
Yes, I think so.
I think the power grid is going to be decentralized
Right.
soon, because we're also going to have more solar panels on the roofs and other things. And that's the best that can happen, because the centralized power system as we have it now is open to sabotage and other things.
And also, like the centralized power system we have now, the problems in Texas last winter were because its grid was not connected to the grid of places that had power.
yeah, the whole thing. You know, I've had solar panels now for about 10 years, and you know, I've always wondered. We make electricity, and then it's sent out to the electricity company, and then they send back whatever it is that we use. I mean, this is kind of a backward way of going about it. I mean, why can I not just use my own electricity directly and forget about all these lines.
Uh-huh.
And so forth.
Well, certainly there are people who are doing that exactly, who are off grid is the expression, and providing their own power.
Yeah, well, you have to have, of course, a place to hold the power, i.e. a battery, and they're unbelievably expensive so far.
Yeah, 50 years ago in Silicon Valley, I knew a guy who was a crazy environmentalist, and he had property up in the hills, and he was using wind power. And when when he had excess power, he would pump water uphill, and he had this network of pipes. And when he needed power that he didn't have from the wind, he would release the water and have it drive turbines.
Yeah,
So he was using water and gravity as a battery.
So Richard, if moving on to materials, what's this teaming up of IBM and Samsung for transistors?
Well, one part of it that to me is actually pretty amazing is the teaming up of such different companies as IBM and Samsung. You know, IBM is one of the companies that has spent billions of dollars literally on semiconductor technology, and yet you don't hear of them in the market. This is what they're making for their own use mainly, I guess. And Samsung, of course, is one of the big players in the market. And so they have been working together on expensive research and development, and have then announced at a recent conference that they have figured out how to design chips in a way that puts the transistors vertically on a chip instead of laying them out horizontally, which is the case now. And because they can lay them out in this vertical way, the space between transistors can be less, and that having the transistors closer together is ending up using very much less energy. So one of the advantages of making them vertical is they're able to get more transistors on a chip. This approach will double the number of transistors on the chip. That sounds like a lot, but that's really just one Moore's law doubling, but it happens at a time when other approaches are at their limit. So it moves the limits of silicon another couple of years before it is obsoleted by whatever technology is going to come next. And they say this is going to let us do, when you have this increased power, you can either make the chips faster, or you can make them use very much less energy. It can reduce the power that the chip uses by 85%. So here, if you imagine your cell phone, for example, where the battery could last a week instead of a day, then that shows you some of the advantages of this technology. And, you know, I think that this kind of development gives us another couple of years of the life of silicon chips before we're going to have to replace it with some new technology that does not really exist yet to keep making things smaller and faster.
Any thoughts? Well, Richard, if we want to move on to space, tell us about this new James Webb Telescope.
Well, the new James Webb Telescope is the most expensive science project ever. It cost $10 billion, and they've been working on it for a decade. And it's supposed to blast off into an orbit 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth, and it's supposed to blast off Friday, December 24th. So keep your eyes paying attention to the technical news that day, because all the astronomers are biting their nails hoping the rocket doesn't blow up, because that would be a problem, losing this telescope. And if you compare it to the Hubble, then there are a couple of things that stick out. The mirror size is about 3 times bigger than the Hubble. So that means it's going to be able to capture more light and see fainter object. It operates at minus 230 degrees C, which is a lot closer to the temperature in space than the Hubble. The Hubble required 20 degrees C to be able to operate. So I didn't realize this, but the Hubble, to keep functioning, had to be heated up, which uses a lot of energy, of course. And this thing, though the mirror is 3 times bigger, it's actually a lot smaller than the Hubble. It has about half of the mass of the Hubble. And they hope to see a couple of kinds of things with this that they're very interested in. One of the things is they hope to be able to see the first stars that lit up in the universe 13.5 billion years ago. And they also believe that they will be able to look more closely at the atmosphere of different planets and see if there are signs of life. One particular thing that they are interested in finding out among these very old stars is they think that these early stars had ones that were really massive and quickly collapsed into black holes. And these direct collapsed black holes have been predicted for a long time, but we've never seen any. And so maybe they will be able to see things that confirm or don't confirm the present theories of physics. And so after the rocket blasts off on Friday, then it's going to take about a month to get into orbit. And during that month, its primary mirror will unfold. And of course, one of the problems with a telescope is you don't want it operating with bright lights around, and it's going to be in space. So the sun is pretty bright in space. So it has a sun shield that also has to unfold. They say the sun shield is the size of a tennis court. And so the James Webb will be in the shadow of the sun shield and able to see into the beginning of the universe.
Any thoughts?
I saw that they're launching this from French Guiana.
Yes.
I didn't know they had facilities there to do something like that.
Neither did I, but it's one of the European facilities, and I can see why the European guys would look for someplace besides, say, France.
Yeah.
Well,
Also, just as an aside, my neighbor is the official weatherman for Ahihik.
Uh-huh.
The website is ahihikweather.com. If you want to go look at that, it has everything about weather. But that's just an aside. He's also an amateur astronomer, and he is so excited he can hardly sit still.
Yes.
He has a big telescope here, and he's just so excited about this.
Yes, a lot of people are, and as I say, they're also chewing their fingernails.
Oh yeah,
It may,
something could go wrong.
it may also change our views on our religious views, whatever it is, to be fine.
Now, when did logic ever get involved with religion? Come on.
If you're a believer, this isn't going to change that.
No, okay.
Or if you're an unbeliever, it's not going to change that.
it's interesting too, the reason they launched them from French Guiana is it's close to the equator.
That
And
makes sense.
It takes less rocket power to get weight into space from the equator.
Right.
The other thing that this article said that was interesting is they only foresee a 10-year life for the Webb telescope. And you think for that amount of money, they'd want to get more than 10 years out of it. But
I don't know what their original plan was for the Hubble. The Hubble has lasted 30 years. And I think they had to recover it more than once.
yeah, the
No
Hubble
problem.
had trouble with the optics, and they had to put different computer software in it to twiddle the optics to make sense of them. But they also say that the Hubble has provided so much data that they've got more data than they can analyze in a century.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Maybe 10 years of the Webb will give them 1,000 years of arithmetic.
Right, but the question will be, how many places can you point it?
Yeah.
And the problem also is when you point it someplace, you know how it is with science, you point it somewhere you weren't expecting to see anything, and then you see something that makes you interested and you want to see more.
What I wonder is how are they going to avoid all the debris that's already in space?
Well, most of the debris in space is close to the Earth, and they're going to be far away from the Earth. So they're not going to be in the path of all the crap we put up there.
Well, they have to go through it at some point.
Well, they send up stuff through it, but that's certainly an interesting point. I guess Russia recently had some tests that they're not saying what it was for that put even more junk in space. It would be ironic if this $10 billion piece of equipment ran into some junk on the way up and broke.
Yeah, and they were mad at the Chinese, I think, or the Russians for blowing up a satellite and creating several thousand particles instead of one big particle.
And the theory was the Russians were experimenting with some anti-satellite technology and that they didn't tell anybody about.
Yeah.
So Richard, tell us about this stunning tree of all known life that Google makes it possible for us to see.
Well, the website is OneZoom. That's one word. I think it's onezoom.com. And if you go on there now, you can see this tree of life. And what they have done is map the connections between 2.2 million living species. And this is the closest view that there has ever been, where the single view of all species known to science. And it's interactive and allows you to zoom in on any species and explore its relations with others. And it's all in one web page to cover 2.2 million living species in one web page. Makes me think it's a pretty big web page. And it was designed and developed by an Imperial College London biodiversity researcher, Dr. James Rosendahl, and a University of Oxford evolutionary biologist, Dr. Yan Wang. And it's the result of more than 10 years work. And they say that this will be regarded as the Google Earth of biotechnology. And you can go there. And as I say, I would recommend that you go there and look around and explore. It's quite interesting, and you can look at your favorite living things, whether it's a golden mole or a giant sequoia, and see its evolutionary history and how it connects together with the other living things on Earth. And it's also has some interesting data. They color code them for red for threatened and green for not threatened and black for recently extinct. However, most of the 2.2 million species, each of which shows up as a leaf on the tree, most of them are gray, which means they haven't been evaluated, and scientists don't have enough data to know their extinction risk. And Dr. Wong, one of the developers, says it's extraordinary how much research there is still to be done. And 2 million species can feel like a number too big to visualize, and there's no museum or zoo that can hold them all. And you can find them on the OneZoom website. And one of the things you could do if you want to help this project, each of the 2.2 million leaves on the tree is available for sponsorship. So if you want to sponsor a leaf on the tree of life, you can do it. It can be the Fred Harland leaf. And there already are people who, or organizations who have sponsored 800 leaves. So that still leaves a lot available for you. They also have integrated data with the Wikipedia to reveal the popularity of every species based on how often the Wikipedia page is viewed. And for example, in the plant world, cannabis comes out on top. They've looked at the Wikipedia page on cannabis more than any others, and cannabis comes out on top ahead of cabbage, potato, and the coconut. And so they say with OneZoom, they hope to give people a completely new way to appreciate evolutionary history and the vastness of life on Earth in all its beauty.
Any thoughts?
Well,
Has anybody looked at it?
Yes. Johanna said
Yeah.
about it. Yes, I think this is the greatest scale project for education and making people aware and for funding of further research that I've seen in a long time, because it's all out there. And, it could be individuals who come and sponsor a little bit of money, but it can also be other organizations that really have lots of money to spend that will take up the responsibility of doing research on all sorts of different things that we don't even know how important they are yet.
And they've designed it for that kind of use because they have a special screen capture tool that makes it easy to create your own user-generated tour and view of things like you would do if you were in a school talking about, say, amphibians. So you can build your lesson plan based on amphibians from the tree of life and have more available in your high school biology class than you ever imagined.
Yeah. And I would think that any grant application has to make reference to this in the future.
Uh-huh.
And they also say that there's only less than a fraction of a percent of all the species that ever existed are currently alive. 99.9% of everything is already extinct.
That's right. Uh-oh.
Everything that ever was.
Yes. Yes.
But they could have called this thing Noah's Ark, and then they would have got a lot of people looking at it from the southern states.
Uh-huh. But you want people who are educated looking at it.
Oh,
Well, Richard, tell us about how California is going to be getting rid of weapons by using the Texas abortion law.
Yes, this is something that I applauded when I first heard it. And California's governor, Gavin Newsom, says that he wants to give private citizens the ability to sue illegal gun manufacturers and assault weapon dealers in California. And he wants to use the model that Texas implemented to restrict abortion rights. And he says if the most efficient way to keep these devastating weapons is off our streets is to add the threat of private lawsuits, we should do just that. And California has for decades banned assault weapons from being sold and manufactured in the states until recently, when a federal judge who likens firearms to Swiss Army knives because they have lots of uses, ruled in June that the law was unconstitutional. And so this then, California wants to use the same kind of legal authority that Texas is using to get around laws, actually. It's funny using legal authority to circumvent laws, but that's what they're doing. And they want to use it to protect people's lives, whereas Texas used it to put women in harm's way. And so this law will let private citizens sue people who are manufacturing assault weapons and firearms and the ghost guns that are weapons without serial numbers that can't be traced. And they'll have private citizens will have the right to seek relief and damages of $10,000 per gun violation, plus costs and attorney's fee. And they will use the same legal shenanigans that Texas used to ban abortions. And while the Supreme Court seemed happy to let Texas use this law to ban abortions, I wonder how they'll react when they use them to ban guns.
Any thoughts?
I think Newton has a good approach.
Well, they said in the article that it really was only targeted at these ghost guns, and that really it's a PR ploy on the part of Newsom to increase his presence or whatever.
I
prior
mean, a
to run.
politician is doing something to make him more popular with the voters? Oh, no.
He's not even, he's doing it to just get his name in front of the voters so it's recognized. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. You wonder how many of these school shootings or whatever are done with ghost guns or
Well, it also talks about assault weapons and assault weapon manufacturing. I don't know what the details are. I do know, though, that now the New York State Attorney General is saying she wants to do it too.
well, the article said it was just aimed at ghost guns, but
I think it's an interesting idea because particularly with assault weapons, the ghost guns, I don't think they have yet made them into big assault weapons. I think they're single weapons. And if people can sue for product that cause harm to people in other areas, why shouldn't they be able to do it on this area?
Well, I'm sort of confused because I thought that the way we were finally, after many, many years, able to get rid of cigarette marketing was because people were able or took up their right to sue the cigarette companies. So why do we need a special law to allow people to
The
do
gun
that?
companies are protected by federal law from lawsuits. All these other companies have to take acts to protect the harm that the users might cause with their product, but the gun manufacturers are not. You cannot presently sue a gun manufacturer even if his gun is illegally sold or legally sold and used to execute a number of school children, for example. The gun manufacturers are immune from those laws.
Time to change the laws.
Yeah, all we need is how are we going to get that through a Republican filibuster?
yeah.
So Richard, for our last item, what's this about the tech bro thinks he's close to conquering death?
Well, the techno guys like things like this. And so now there's a 35-year-old James Peyer, I guess Peyer, I don't know how to pronounce it. And he has made a longevity startup, Cambrian Biopharma. And he says in our history as a species, it's only been the last 75 years that these diseases of aging have been the quote, the primary predators of humankind. And he says we're rapidly zeroing in on our biggest predators, which are these diseases of aging, and figuring out how to beat them back. And so, of course, as a startup, he wants to turn this into products that he can make money on. And he is a stem cell researcher, and he believes that aging is a disease that humans can fight with pharmaceuticals, products that they can make. And he plans to start with this by identifying disorders and diseases that mimic aging, such as those that cause loss of muscle mass, and then team with researchers studying medicines for these diseases, and then start companies to make and sell the drugs associated with these diseases identified. So he's going to turn fighting aging diseases into big business. And he wants to then expand research on medication for off-label anti-aging purposes to gain government approval for this work. And then last month, Cambrian Biopharma successfully raised $100 million from a visionary group of investors. So there's big money behind it. And in Silicon Valley, these Silicon Valley types have already started taking metformin, which is a diabetic drug used to control blood sugar. And so far, this is based only on a few preliminary studies that show metformin to have anti-aging properties, but it's not been widely researched because aging is not considered a disease by any governmental bodies. But an anonymous visionary has already put up half of the $70 million needed to fund a proper human trial of metformin as a longevity drug. And so it's another startup that is trying to figure out how to cheat death. And if they can pull it off, they feel like they would change the course of human history for better or worse. But whether that goal is possible, no one knows. But a lot of the Silicon Valley venture capitalist guys are putting big money on this. And we know some of them, like Peter Thiel, are putting big money on this because he personally doesn't want to die, and he figures he can extend his life maybe another 10 or 20 years, and then technology will be developed where they can stop and reverse aging. And so he'll live forever, and with all his money, he won't run out.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I hope he doesn't get COVID because that's going to ruin his plans.
Yeah, maybe he lives in a bubble now.
I did look this drug up, the metformin. You can buy it on Amazon, Mexico, for 80 pesos.
Right,
40.
it's cheap. You can buy
It's
it
cheap.
in any pharmacy around here.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
cheap. 80
So-
pesos for 40 pills.
Right, so, know,
I just-
and, I have low-level diabetes that I've been able to basically take care of through diet. I'm still taking metformin, and my doctor prescribed some new medication that he thought would relieve the need for metformin. And because of these anti-aging properties, he can't get me to quit it.
Good.
I did think you would look kind of young, Richard. Anyway,
Well, Richard, thanks very much. Good session, and thanks everybody for participating. And nice to see you again. I guess we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, next week, we're not going to have a session. Fred has his son coming. He's going to be busy, and I'm just going to take the opportunity to have a week off. I'll still do the weekly science newsletter. So those of you who need science to read, you'll have pages and pages of good stuff to peruse. And if you want to talk about it, you can send me emails and we can chat by email.
All the best, folks.
have all a happy new year. And
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, all of those
Thank you, Rick.
things.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah,
One last
thank you.
question. One
Yes.
last question. The plans to be in person at LCS, have they advanced or are they still up in the air?
We're still trying to figure out what and how we would do it. And we have a meeting scheduled with them early in January to talk more about it. And we will see, however it is, I would still like to figure out how to do it, to have you guys who have been with us all this time to still be included. But it may be hard to do it where we can have the dialogue with you that we have now, because we might have to do it in a way where we just give you a video and audio feed. Anyway, there are complications of doing this stuff where you have both a live audience and an audience on TV. We figured out how to do it with the Unitarians, but there we have a team of people who are dedicated to it and multiple cameras and all of this other stuff, and they don't have that at LCS. They could, if they decided that it was going to be important to them, they could develop those resources. They have to spend a lot of money to do it and get volunteers who can do it. So we'll see.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, anyway, see you next time.
See you next time. And again, happy whatever.
Happy.
Holidays.
Okay, yeah, see you in a little bit.
Adios.